In a co-authored piece on ePortfolios that appears in the 2013 Heidi McKee and Daniel DeVos collection, Digital Writing, Assessment, and Evaluation, you cite Jeff Rice's work on networked assessment. Rice reminds us after Latour that networks are already there, and our job is to trace them. For Rice, tracing means describing as much of an observed activity as possible, during which patterns and connections not previously understood will be located. Likewise, Derek Mueller advocates for what he calls network sense, which he says entails an aptitude enriched by this tracing of linkages across an assortment of people, places, things, and moments. So when you say that composition is an expression of relationships, are you talking about networks?
Is this a trick question? Certainly networks provide us with a mechanism or a concept, means of tracing, etc. Them. I mean, at one level, yes, but not necessarily, right? So, in fact, actually, when I was program chair for WPA, we met in Park City, and the conference theme, which the program chair ordinarily and I did conceive of, was the formation of relationships with form \A\shun, right? So the idea was to try to capture the dynamic quality of relationships rather than seeing them as static entities. And that is sort of what I'm pushing back against here. I think relationships are always in flux. Even when you think a relationship, even when you think a relationship is really solid. No reason you would know this, but Ian McEwan he's a Booker Award-winning novelist out of the UK, and he has a book called Enduring Love, which, as it turns out, is not. I'm sorry for the spoiler there, but I mean, this couple in theory that seems pretty happy. There's one event which is, I mean, in a normal situation would be interesting, but wouldn't be life altering for the people just witnessing the event. It's basically a balloon that crashes. So it's a little unnerving, but it's not. This wouldn't affect your life necessarily, but in the novel it does. And it simply speaks to the fragility of relationships. So that's another aspect. So, I mean, to use WPA as an example, the field seemed to have one relationship to WPA 5 years ago, and it seems to have a somewhat different relationship to WPA now. Now, I have to say, in the current moment, they're planning a program next month. I've seen the program. I think it looks pretty good. So they seem to be well on their way to speaking in a way that the field values. Of course, it's hard to talk about the field. I mean, the field values. Who am I talking about? Clearly, I'm only talking about. I mean, not everybody in the field is interested in WPA work to begin with, and never was, which is fine. Not everybody in the field is interested in tech writing. Not everybody in the field is interested in computers and writing, or writing center studies, or whatever. So on the one hand, yeah, you can conceive of relationships as constituting a kind of network, but it's a network that apparently you have to keep fostering in order for it to be a healthy network, which is, we don't talk about networks as healthy as unhealthy, but that's a really important component. I would also suggest that, obviously, personally, there are some networked relationships that are entirely unhealthy, if not toxic. I would give you the network of a particular political party, just as an example, which doesn't, and that's an interesting way to think about it, because you got some people like Asa Hutchinson, just as an example, or Chris Christie, who are trying to alter the network, if you will. They are within the network. That's why they have a certain kind of credibility. In fact, I mean, there's all kinds of political pundits writing about this right now, especially about Christie, because apparently it was just on a town hall, and which apparently I didn't catch. But we know what he's doing. I mean, if you're paying any attention at all. And they're within the network, so they can speak to what's going on inside that network in a way in which an independent, Bernie Sanders, or a Democrat, name your favorite one, can't. I mean, they can say it, but they won't get heard in the same way. And the question is whether people inside the network can. So that's another way to think about a network, is that you've got different. A network, I'm drawn to networks. I like networks. I think they're an interesting and very helpful way to conceive certain activities. But I also think that, as I've indicated, there's a tendency to see them as static, not changing, to see them as sort of every node in the network as being equal. And that is definitely not the way a network works. There are definitely some nodes on networks. I mean, in that particular network, the one I was referencing, clearly Trump is the node that outnodes all of them. And the question is whether that network can be changed. Networks do change over time. This is the same Republican Party that, in theory, elected Abraham Lincoln in 1859. My, how things have changed. So yes, but also no. And thank you for the question, I think.
Tracing networks is a big part of understanding and studying them. What does it mean to you to trace networks, and what's the value of that kind of approach?
I'm glad you asked, because I actually have a piece of student work that I'm going to share with you. And it's from a project that I often ask students to do, having to do with creating what I called a circulation map. So it's also, it's Jeff Rice's idea, it's Lori Grease's idea. There's several people who have sort of looked at this. And so what I asked students to do was to create a map of circulation. And before they would do that, they would send in a proposal. So this is one from a student. Tracking the development of different hashtags in response to a significant social media emphasized event. For instance, the social media response to the death of Cecil the Lion. You remember Cecil the Lion? Well, and then the person who shot him. The dentist, if you remember, right? Gave new idea, never mind, to the... to what we mean when we think of dental work. Are you the guy who did this? Yeah. On Twitter, and how variants of the original hashtag reflects a shifting in the focusing of the issue. So again, the notion that a network is dynamic, that things can change. But I think what a tracing enables you to do is see the shifts and see how things relate to other things. So sometimes, you'll say, it's a commonplace to say, we got from A to B. How do we get from here? How do we get from here to here? Well, tracing enables you to see that. And I'll say, in my own, out of my own experience. So I did a piece on the Parkland survivors that's in enculturation. And one of the things that was most alarming was that you would, for instance, through tracing, see that the fact that Chelsea Clinton, this is, an accurate example, Chelsea Clinton liked something that one of the Parkland survivors would say, and that would amplify what they said. So that's fine, I guess. They're on the same team, in theory. But then when there was someone like Gateway Pundit that talked about David Hogue's father being, a false FBI agent, and Chelsea Clinton disliked that, it amplified Gateway Pundit's false claim. So that helps you see that the effect isn't always, her point was to say, this person doesn't know, what he's talking about, but it turns out that it creates to the circulation of the claim, and so it makes it seem more credible simply by virtue of the fact that it circulates. So that kind of tracing helps you see, basically, at least at some level, how some of this activity actually happens. So when something goes viral, it's not just that it goes viral, it's that certain things happen. And when you trace what those things are, you begin to understand both what's possible if you want to do such a thing, but also how this is done to you. So you are not your own agent entirely in seen through this kind of a schema. That's what I would say.
The setup for the question mentions Rice's work, which is geared towards networks of circulation and assessment.
Right.
Derek Mueller's work geared to early on networks of disciplinarity.
Right.
What other kinds of networks can be fruitfully traced?
Well, I want to go back to Jeff's for a minute because I thought that was a really, really smart article. Basically the article, and it was in reference to a WAC program, if I recall correctly, and his argument was that instead of saying how well are we doing, you ask a different question, which is what are we doing? And forget the how. Just figure out what you're doing before you begin to think about value. I just thought that was really smart. And I see shades of that in some other kinds of institutional ethnography in some ways goes in that same direction, though the theoretical frame is very different. But nobody has really taken that up very much. And I'm sorry. I think the field, to be fair, they're responding to pressures from accrediting agencies and upper level administrators. And believe me, I'm very sympathetic to that. At the same time, I think having what Jeff proposed was something like an audit. I think having something like an audit before you figure out where you want to focus your assessment efforts is so smart. And I just wish we did more of that. The larger question about networks, basically, I would just refer to convergence culture because and I'll give you two examples. If you think of convergence culture, then you begin to understand hardly my idea, obviously, but yes, thank you. How different networks interact with each other and shape each other. I think Henry Jenkins is a little more utopian about this than I would be. It's the thing about Facebook being Facebook because it scoops up everything we give to Facebook, that Facebook couldn't be Facebook without all the people participating. But when it comes to what we might want in Facebook, we don't seem to have much of a voice. So that's one thing I would say. I think the other thing, I would point to the Parkland example. I mentioned this in another segment, but I thought that they were very smart about using all the networks that are available. So if you say, all the available means of persuasion, they were very adept at using all of them. So they were interviewed by people. They had more than one book that they put out. They started with social media. So they're bringing traditional media companies into dialogue with new media and social media efforts to create, again, that's the possibility of it, to create a different kind of universe, a universe where gun rights are diminished and human rights are amplified. I think studying more efforts that look like that. I'll say, I think we have one of those kinds of efforts, but it's really under the radar, and as it needs to be. It's people who are helping women who need abortions. I think those networks are not very much in play. You get a little bit of media coverage of that, which is how I would know about it. But without those networks, it's like an underground railroad, which is another kind of network early on. That's the other. I could talk a long time about all this. So, but I'd say that you had an underground railroad, which was one kind of network. I would say that was, although the differences between race and gender, obviously, but here we are, whatever, 140, 150 years later, 160, can I count? No. And it's another underground network, not going so much from north to south, but going from place to place in order to help women who need abortions. But it's the same kind of mechanism. I think the media they use to communicate are different, but it's still a human rights cause, interestingly. So I think that's another way of understanding networks. I've sort of emphasized ones that are very public, political, for example, and then civil rights. These are also civil rights, but in a somewhat different way, and also and not public, because the only way they survive is by not being public. But then, of course, all of that will then feed into a public campaign, regarding abortion nationally in 2024. I'm guessing that will be an issue, short of Congress passing a law, which seems, if they want to pass a law, it would be against abortion. So let's not hope for that. But also state by state. You look at the referendum in Kansas, where the voters said, yes, actually, we want women to have access. So that's another way of thinking about networks at different where they are relative to visibility, and how networks that are under the radar can then contribute to networks, if you will, that are above the radar, which again goes to the notion of hierarchy. I have to say, I'm really drawn to the utopian idea of a network. It's a flattened structure. We're all equal. Stop laughing at me. No, I'm totally drawn to that. But, a closer look at it reveals my naivete.
What, for you, are the networks most important to a composer?
Oh, I think a lot of people would say being a member of a writing group. At FSU, Jackie Fiskus, who joined the Rhetoric and Comp program around 2018, that's one of the things. I mean, she's a junior faculty member, but a writing group is really important to her. And she thought it might be to graduate students. So she holds writing hours every week, even virtually during COVID, now face-to-face or hybrid really, I guess, just as creating, a regular rhythm and a regular pattern. And I know that, my friend and colleague Michael Neal has attended those and has found them really helpful. I think especially for people who need, we're all different. That'll be a surprise to you. I usually use my husband as an example because we're definitely different. But at one moment in time, we were both runners, and so the way we approached it. Well, he was better at it, and we'll start with that. But that's not the salient issue. The salient issue was that he liked external validation. He liked races. He liked the T-shirts. He liked the beer afterwards. I mean, he just liked the whole shtick, which I'm sympathetic to. I mean, I thought that was okay. I actually like to run to be alone. I don't want to run with other people. They're all running in a pack. They're all people. No, I want to run by myself. I want to bring some music with me. I want to process. It's a really, really good way for me to process now. I'm not running any longer, but I am walking quite a lot. And it's a great way to process. And that seems like an odd way to think about it. I think my networks, I'm obviously thinking aloud through this. Thanks for the hard question. It's actually, I think that the human materialists among us will be thrilled to hear that I think mine are more in relation to objects or activities, if not objects. So running, walking, some kind of physical activity, having space. I need time to mull. I can't. I remember sending something off to somebody, and somebody who knows my writing pretty well came back and said, didn't have much time, did you? Well, it's a friend, so I mean, it was okay. But as I say, the person knew my writing pretty well and could see. When I'm not, when I give myself sufficient time, it shows in the writing, as it does with everybody. I'm hardly unique in this. So time, some sort of physical activity. I compose at the keyboard, which I can't imagine why one wouldn't these days. But I often have notes ahead of time, or if not ahead of time, I'll pause and say, no, wait a minute, what am I doing here? And then I'll make some notes. And and at the end of the day, then I save it for a certain amount of time, and then I check it. I think I also think there's a kind of a tactile part of it that is, if I were going to have this network of the things that I need to be a composer, if you said to me, we're taking away all the keyboards in the world, and you have to either compose by longhand or using a typewriter, which I still have my Smith Corona, thank you very much, I think I would just stop composing. I think I would do something else. Writing by longhand is just, it's too slow, it's too painful. And I was typing something, not recently, 10 years ago maybe, that you had to type for some sort of something I was doing at school. You can't revise on a typewriter. Do you know how often you revise on a keyboard? I mean, it's astonishing. I do think sort of in the background, I've never been part of a writing group. That's not true. I was part of a writing group at Clemson, and we never got any writing done. We met like every month or 6 weeks. It was the Peer Center team. So it was Michael Neal and Summer Smith Taylor, Morgan Gresham, and Teddy Fishman. And we met because we were going to write together. And then, honestly, well, that's not true. We had a piece with Art Young, and we did a couple things, but it didn't happen in the writing group. Basically, things were sort of not going as we might have wished at Clemson, and they were all junior, and they didn't really understand how any of us worked, and I'd never seen anything like this either, and so we were trying to sort it out, and that's what we did. We spent our time sorting all that out. Not that it helped. And I helped our understanding. It didn't change the reality on the ground. Being a writing group, I know other people, almost everybody I know actually, now that I think of it, has been in a writing group at one time or another, and they really like it, and I can't get around that. I guess I don't need that. I don't need that kind of social activity. I rarely send off a draft to somebody. I had people do that a lot. Here's a draft. What do you think? I must never do that. I think I'm my own worst critic. So I get to a point where I think this is okay. So I think my network is not, well, I mean, obviously, then the network of resources that I draw. Now that's a rabbit hole. I mean, that's a big node in the network because because when everything leads to everything. So so in fact, I was sort of, after you all left yesterday, I was sort of packing things up, and I picked up some notes relative to an article I was working on, and I looked at all the references. I thought, why half of these have nothing to do with it? But it was one thing led to another, and they were all interesting. That's the thing; it's all interesting. There you go. That's something of a network. It's an odd conception of network, but I think that's the way you'd have to conceive of it for me. The resources are important. I shouldn't have got that last because I think it's because I don't go there first. The reason I don't go there first is that I want to be sure that what I have to say is different than what has already been said. And so and in general, I mean, I wouldn't go into a field where I knew nothing. I wouldn't use that approach. In general, I'm writing in an area where I at least know enough to make me dangerous. So I know more or less what's out there. I may not know it in particular detail. I may not be able to give you a page number, but I have some idea what's going on. So I don't need to check the resources. And if I go there first, I won't be able to disambiguate what it is I think or what I have to contribute to what's already been said. So I like to get whatever I have to say down. I mean, it's not well crafted, but I've got the essence of it, and then go and see what the research. And then that's really fun because that does often seriously influence what I have to say here. A perfect example was the talk I gave at WAC last weekend, where I knew I wanted to talk about writing and running across the curriculum and what is writing, and so I knew I wanted to do that, but it was only by finding the Chris Anson chapter in a book that was published in 1989 that I had a frame. So I tapped that frame, crediting Chris, of course, and that was really helpful for saying what I wanted to say. That's a pretty good example of how that kind of networking works for me. And if you were to follow that part of the network out, then in theory, that's the way networks are kept alive, in part. So I'm looking at a chapter that Chris wrote that I don't think anybody has cited very recently. I mean, Chris had to go find it for me and send it to me, which was great. But that sort of brings it back to everybody's vision, right? They can see it. It's alive again. Also because it's been used in another way. It's been repurposed, if you will. And then both of those ideas are then floating in the world. They really become part of the network if somebody else attaches them. Or if I take this talk and I publish it, then that gives it another venue and another node on a different kind of network that intersects with this. I think I've networked this enough.